essentially a sweet shortbread pastry dough. And we're going to be using it today to form into beautiful tart shells. I'm going to go through all the steps how to do that. So to get started, of course, we want to mise en place all of our ingredients. And to create our sandy texture is going to come down to the method in which we mix our ingredients, and also the addition of some almond meal as well. It's going to give a little bit of extra fat and that beautiful crumbly texture. So I'm going to do everything in my stand mixer today, but you can also do this by hand, and I'll go through how to do it by hand as well. So I'm going to pop in my all-purpose flour. And with our confectioner sugar, so confectioner sugar is essentially just powdered sugar, which has a small quantity of starch, generally like 2% starch. And I always like to sift my confectioner sugar just to ensure that there are no lumps. We also have a little bit of almond meal. I'm going to sift that a little bit too, just so there's no lumps. I think that is fine. I'm just gonna pop that straight in. And our salt, so we have all of our dry ingredients going in. I'm going to give this a mix just to combine everything together. Now with our firm vegan margarine, so this is like a high-fat vegan margarine or butter alternative. I always like to find one which is a minimum of 70% fat, so somewhere between 70 and 80. It's going to be firm like a butter, but of course this is completely dairy-free. And you want it cold, but you don't want it to be too cold. So I always like to cut it into cubes and then leave it on my bench for about 30 minutes. So with our margarine, we're going to get that going in now. And if you were incorporating this by hand at this stage, you would rub that butter in between your fingertips. And we want to process this until we have a breadcrumb-like texture. You might need to pulse a little bit just in the beginning. So while that's mixing, I have my water here, which I've already combined with the xanthan gum. I just let that set aside for about 15 to 20 minutes, just to start it to hydrate, so to absorb all of that moisture. Now that xanthan gum is really going to help hold this tart shell together, which is very important and a function that we're looking for when we're replacing the egg for this recipe. Now using an immersion blender, we're just going to blend that vegan egg replacement together just to ensure that there is no big lumps of that xanthan gum. And you'll be left with this gel-like substance, which is kind of like an egg white. Now, if you'd like your sablé dough to have a buttery flavor, you can add some butter aroma, and I like to add this actually to the vegan egg replacement, just to make sure that it incorporates well into our dough. Okay, so I'm just going to take this off just to ensure that it's mixed well. We just want to make sure that there's no big lumps of that margarine in there. So it's looking pretty good so far. I'm just going to mix it for about a minute more. So by mixing the fat with the flour, what we are doing is we're coating each particle of that flour with the fat, which stops our dough becoming tough. So it makes it a lot more tender. Okay, so this is looking good. We can start adding in our vegan egg now. And we want to mix this until everything has just come together. So we can see it's coming into a dough now. And as soon as it's formed a dough, we can switch that off. We don't want to overwork that dough, otherwise we'll have a tough pastry. Pop it onto our bench and just make sure that everything's incorporated well. It looks great. So we're going to divide this into 2 portions. So I'm just going to weigh this now and then divide it. So we need about 380 per portion. I'm just making sure that all of that margarine is incorporated. Now we have our 2 portions of dough. We're going to start rolling these out. So I'm going to be using some guitar sheets. Now this is what we use in the professional bakery or patisserie to roll out doughs, but we also use it for chocolate work. You can of course use just some baking paper to do this, but I find with the guitar sheets, it's much easier to use and they won't wrinkle when you roll them out. So this is the standard size of the sheet, and we are going to cut these in half. So I'm just folding them over, and then we'll be left with 4 sheets. So I'm just going to take out 2 for now, and we'll start with 1 piece of our dough. Place that into the center, and I'm just going to start pressing it into a rectangle about 1/2 inch thick, just to get it started. And then we're going to pop that sheet on top, and we're essentially going to roll it out about 2 millimeters thick. I really like to use some rolling guides. Sometimes you can get the ones that are already attached to your rolling pin. These are just like the sticks, and you just put them either side of your dough, and you can use that to help you guide the thickness. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. You should get like a full sheet out of 1/2 a batch of the dough. And I'm just going to smooth that out. Just make sure it's nice and flat. So that's looking great. I'm just going to pop this onto a tray. And you want to chill your dough for a minimum of 2 hours before you use it for your tart shells. Okay, so I'm happy with that one. Onto the tray as well. So I'm going to now transfer our dough to the fridge for a minimum of 2 hours to completely rest all of that gluten to relax. So when we cut them out, we have less chance of it shrinking when they bake. So into the fridge. So our dough has been chilling for a couple of hours. We're going to start preparing our forms for our tart shells. Now I'm using these professional pastry shell forms, and you can see they have a perforated edge. Now this is going to allow the even distribution of the heat transfer, and it also allows you to be able to bake these without having to put paper inside and like a weight. So they're fantastic. You get a very professional finish. And I just bought these ones on Amazon. They were super low cost, but you can buy the professional ones as well. I just wanted to try out, and I love these little mini sizes. So these ones that I have here today are 5 centimeters in diameter. And I'm just going to grease them lightly on the inside just to ensure that we won't have any sticking of our dough. So I'm just wiping around each one with oil. Let's start off with 1 sheet. I'm going to leave this on the cold tray just so it keeps chilled. And I'm just going to peel back one side and then pop our guitar sheet back on and then flip over. Now we're going to create some strips that are going to go around the inside. Now the easiest way to find out what the length is that you're going to need is you want to do a little bit of math. So our diameter times 3.2. So my diameter is 5 centimeters. So I'm going to need roughly 16 centimeters for our strip. So let's get ourselves a ruler. Let's make a nice clean edge, and our width here is 2 millimeters, and I always like to make it like maybe about 1 millimeter thicker, 1 or 2 millimeters thicker. Now if any time your dough starts getting too soft, you can pop it into the freezer to firm up. So my dough's already getting a little bit soft. I'm gonna pop it into the freezer for about 15 minutes to chill. just pulled out my tarts, which I have formed the outside out of the freezer. So these ones are frozen. They've been in there for about 30 minutes. But I put my dough in the refrigerator because I don't want it to be frozen, but I still want it to be chilled. This way the base is going to stick a lot easier. So let's start. We've got a little bit left on this one here. And what we're going to do is just place them over the top. And we're just going to go over with our rolling pin. And that base should just lift right up, and then you've got it perfectly formed. Now you can use these scraps one more time. You can roll them out. So I'm just going to bunch them all together and do the other lot. Now with this one, I'm just going to take the top off and then flip it. Just going to release a lot more easily. And this same process can be done for any size tart ring. So now I'm going to pop these into the freezer for about 20 minutes, and while they are freezing up, we're going to preheat our oven. I have my tart shells. I've just taken them out of the freezer, so they're completely firmed up now. And I have a tray ready for the oven, which I've lined with some baking paper and an air mat. Now I'm just going to quickly spritz my air mat just with a little bit of oil. And I'm going to put our tart shells spaced out on there. And I have my oven preheating at 160 degrees Celsius. We're going to get this going in for about 15 minutes. Look, the size is really going to be dependent on how long you bake, but I'm going to start with 15 minutes and then we're just going to keep an eye. The goal is to get a nice deep golden color to our tart shells. All right, let's get these going in the oven. I just checked on my tart shells and they were starting to brown around the edges, but not fully cooked. So I've just turned the temperature down a little bit and we're going to continue baking them for another 10 minutes. And yeah, we want to ensure that we have the golden color all the way through. So we're just doing it nice and slowly just to ensure we have the perfect little tart shells. Now our tart shells are ready and you can see they are lovely and golden. They're still warm, so at this stage you want to take them out of the forms. Because they're hot, you might just need a tea towel to help you do that. So our little mini tart shells are ready and I popped them out of the forms. So now I'm just going to store these until I'm ready to use them. So I've just got myself here a container, and you can store in your container for a couple of weeks, and you just want to leave them outside in a nice dark and cool place. And then when you're ready to use them, you just refresh them in the oven. I'll leave all the details in the recipe. But yeah, you just put them in the oven for like 5 to 7 minutes just to freshen them up, and then you can put all your favorite fillings inside. So I made all these little tart shells a few days ago and I've just stored them in a container. But because they might be a few days old or a week old, we're going to refresh these just so they taste lovely and fresh for the day that we are serving them. So this is pretty standard practice in a bakery. You would make a whole batch of these, maybe like once a week or once every couple of weeks. And then you just refresh them in the oven however many you need for the day. I'm actually going to do all of them. We're going to refresh all of these. And all that is doing is, yeah, just making it nice and crisp, making sure they're nice and dry and have a nice fresh flavor. So I've got my oven set to 150 degrees Celsius. I'm going to pop these in for just like 7 minutes, just to give them a nice refresh. So there we go, just pop them on a tray. You don't need to put anything down, that's completely fine. And 5 minutes at 150 degrees Celsius convection. So while our tart shells are being refreshed in the oven right now, we are going to create the glaze that goes on the inside. So essentially we are just brushing the inside with a equal parts quantity of vegan white chocolate and some cocoa butter. So we're just going to melt those two together, and by brushing this inside the tart shell, it's going to ensure that that tart shell is going to stay lovely and crisp, and the filling is not going to make it soggy. So you can enjoy these tarts for a few days and they're still going to be lovely and fresh and crisp. So I'm just boiling some water here, creating a bit of a bain-marie. Once it's boiling, I am going to switch this off or put it on like a super low heat. And I'm just going to pop that on there. We'll melt this down. If you're really struggling to find the vegan white chocolate, you can just use cocoa butter. That's totally fine as well. Well, it's definitely starting to smell like a bakery in my kitchen this morning. I've just taken out my tart shells from being refreshed. I'm going to set them aside to cool down before we put our glaze inside. So our tart shells have cooled down. Now we can go in with our glaze, which is just our cocoa butter and vegan white chocolate. Now there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can go ahead and use a nice dry brush like so, and just dip it into your cocoa butter. And we're just going to brush around all around the inside. We want to make sure it's fully coated. Or you can use a finger, clean of course, and just go in there and wiggle that around. Sometimes using your finger is faster if you are making really small tart shells like this. Okay, so with that leftover glaze, you can pop that into a container and just use it when you need. You can leave it outside just to set up, and then you can just melt it back down either in the microwave or over a bain-marie. I'm gonna leave these just for a few minutes for that cocoa butter to set before we start putting our filling in.